Part 6, Storm Dragon Arcade. The state of California is suddenly struck by a thunderstorm. The storm is unlike anything the people of California have ever seen before. Lightning strikes seemingly at random, illuminating the sky in brilliant flashes, and thunder echoes through the land, shaking the very foundations of the state. Amidst the chaos, a strange creature emerges from the heart of the storm. It is a towering, winged beast, part eagle and part dragon, its scales shimmering like polished steel in the lightning's glare. The people of California, having never before encountered such a creature, name it the Storm Dragon. As the storm continues to rage, the Storm Dragon circles high above the state, its massive wings creating powerful gusts of wind that uproot trees and topple buildings. The people of California are terrified, not knowing what to make of this new threat. Some believe it to be a harbinger of doom, while others see it as a divine messenger, sent to punish them for their sins. In the midst of the chaos, a small group of adventurers manages to track the Storm Dragon to its lair, deep within the heart of a mountain. They find the creature hoarding treasures and artifacts stolen from across the land, including a piece of the sacred relic. The adventurers realize that if they can reclaim the relic, they may be able to use its power to either control or destroy the Storm Dragon. A desperate battle ensues, as the adventurers and the Storm Dragon clash high atop the mountain. The beast's claws and teeth are as sharp as swords, and its wings create powerful gusts of wind that threaten to send the adventurers hurtling to their doom. The adventurers manage to strike a blow against the Storm Dragon, wounding it, but it is clear that they cannot defeat it alone. The Empire of Sunhaven hears news of the battle with the Storm Dragon and decides to send reinforcements to aid the adventurers. A mighty army of soldiers and mages marches across the land, led by the Emperor himself, determined to put an end to the Storm Dragon's rampage and claim the stolen piece of the sacred relic. Meanwhile, the Shadow King's forces continue their relentless march across Kentucky, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The people of the state, now thoroughly subjugated, are forced to build massive temples and shrines in honor of the Shadow King, spreading his twisted doctrine of darkness and despair. As the Empire's spies report back on the situation in California, the Emperor decides to divert some of his forces to aid in the fight against the Storm Dragon. A group of elite shadow mages, trained in the darkest arts of necromancy and summoning, are sent forth to aid the adventurers and the remnants of the California army. The Shadow King, pleased with the progress of his invasion, begins to focus his attention on the southern states. He sends out a proclamation, promising freedom and prosperity to those who will willingly submit to his rule, while those who resist will face utter destruction. Many are drawn in by the false promises, while others see the writing on the wall and choose to flee westward, hoping to find sanctuary in the untouched territories of Arizona or New Mexico. The elite shadow mages arrive at the mountain base, ready to aid the adventurers in their battle against the Storm Dragon. They use their dark magic to summon forth skeletal warriors and ghastly beasts to aid them in the fight, while also working to weaken the Storm Dragon from afar with necromantic spells and curses. As the adventurers and the California army mount a coordinated assault, the reinforcements turn the tide of battle in their favor. The Storm Dragon, weakened and surrounded by enemies, is forced to retreat deeper into its lair. The adventurers, the California army, and the shadow mages pursue it, fighting their way through treacherous tunnels and ancient ruins. After a long and arduous battle, they finally corner the Storm Dragon atop a pinnacle of rock, high above a bottomless chasm. The Emperor of the Empire of Sunhaven arrives at the mountain base with the main force of his army, ready to support the adventurers and the California army in their final assault on the Storm Dragon. The Shadow King, sensing the threat posed by the combined forces, sends his most powerful servants and minions to aid the Storm Dragon in its last stand. The final battle is epic in scale, as the forces of good and evil clash high atop the mountain. The air is thick with the cacophony of battle cries, spells, and the beating of wings. The Storm Dragon, its strength sapped by the elite shadow mage's necromantic magic, struggles valiantly against the onslaught, but it is clear that the tide has turned. But then the Shadow King's servants arrive to aid the Storm Dragon. The battle becomes even more desperate, as the forces of evil begin to gain the upper hand. The elite shadow mages, exhausted from their previous efforts, are forced to fall back, and the reinforcements from the Empire of Sun Heaven find themselves caught in the crossfire. The Storm Dragon, emboldened by its newfound allies, launches a fierce counterattack, driving the adventurers and the California army back. The Emperor, realizing the dire situation, orders his forces to fall in around the adventurers and the California army, forming a protective barrier. The soldiers and mages of the Empire fight valiantly, holding the line against the Storm Dragon and its allies. The Shadow King, sensing the opportunity, prepares to make a decisive strike, but before he can act, a lone figure appears from the ranks of the adventurers. It is a legendary figure, clad in ancient armor and wielding a sword forged in the fires of legend. The figure, known only as the Last Champion, begins to fight its way through the ranks of the Storm Dragon's forces. The Shadow King, recognizing the threat posed by this newcomer, sends his strongest minions to stop him. The Last Champion battles valiantly, single-handedly turning the tide of the battle. The Storm Dragon, realizing that it is losing ground, decides to make a desperate gamble. It flies high into the air, leaving the battlefield momentarily, and begins to gather energy from the ley lines that course through the mountain. The Shadow King, seeing this, smirks. He knows that if the Storm Dragon can harness enough power, it will be able to unleash a devastating spell that could obliterate everything within miles. He orders his minions to focus their efforts on stopping the Last Champion, while he himself begins to prepare for the impending attack. The Last Champion, unaware of the Storm Dragon's plan, continues to fight his way through the ranks of the Shadow King's minions. His sword flashes like lightning, his armor shining like polished steel in the dim light of the battle. As he nears the Storm Dragon, he can feel its presence, a malevolent energy that chills him to the bone. The Shadow King, seeing the Last Champion's progress, becomes increasingly desperate. He sends his most powerful servants, including the Lich King, the Vampire Queen, and the Demon Lord, to stop the champion. But the Last Champion is like a whirlwind, cutting through their ranks with ease. The Lich King, unable to match the champion's speed, unleashes a wave of undeath, summoning a horde of skeletons and zombies to attack. The Vampire Queen, her fangs bared, swoops in, attempting to drain the champion's strength with a bite. The Demon Lord, his demonic aura choking the air, launches a barrage of fireballs and lightning bolts at the champion. Meanwhile, the Storm Dragon has gathered enough energy and begins to focus it into a massive ball of energy. The Shadow King, sensing the impending attack, orders his minions to fall back, forming a defensive line around the Emperor and his forces. The Last Champion, still unaware of the Storm Dragon's plan, continues his relentless advance. As he reaches the Storm Dragon, the Shadow King smirks, confident that the dragon's spell will obliterate everything in its path. The Storm Dragon lets out a deafening roar and unleashes the energy ball towards the center of the battlefield. The Last Champion, realizing the danger too late, tries to deflect the attack with his sword. The ball of energy collides with his sword, sending a blinding flash of light and heat through the air. When the light fades, the Last Champion lies motionless on the ground, his armor dented and his sword shattered. The Shadow King, seeing his chance, sends out a wave of darkness that engulfs the fallen champion. The darkness begins to flow into the champion's body, healing his wounds and restoring his strength. As the champion rises to his feet, he feels a newfound connection to the darkness, his body now tingling with power. He turns to face the Shadow King, his eyes glowing with a sinister light. The Lich King, seeing the champion's transformation, realizes that he has been outmatched. He flees the battlefield, seeking refuge in his tomb deep within the mountains. The Vampire Queen, enraged by the loss of her servant, swoops down, fangs bared, ready to claim the champion as her own. But the champion, now under the influence of the Shadow King, repels her, driving her away with a wave of darkness. The Demon Lord, seeing the power the champion now wields, is both intrigued and afraid. He decides to wait and observe, biding his time until the champion's allegiance is clear. The Shadow King, pleased with the champion's newfound loyalty, grants him the title of Dark Lord, entrusting him with command over the remaining minions. The Storm Dragon, exhausted from its exertion, hovers above the battlefield, watching the events unfold. It senses the shift in power and influence, and decides to remain neutral for now, content to bide its time until the balance of power once again tips in its favor. The newly crowned Dark Lord, the champion now known as the Shadow King, surveys his domain with a satisfied smile. He can feel the weight of the Shadow King's trust upon his shoulders, and he intends to use that power to shape the world according to his will. His first order of business is to consolidate his rule, eliminating any potential threats and rivals. The Vampire Queen, enraged by her failure to control the champion, retreats to her domain, plotting her revenge. The Demon Lord, cautious but intrigued by the champion's newfound abilities, remains on the sidelines for now, biding his time until the perfect opportunity arises. The Storm Dragon, ever watchful, continues to monitor the shifting alliances and power struggles, preparing for the day when it will once again play a more active role in the fate of the world. As the Dark Lord begins his reign, he immediately sets about strengthening his position. He forms new alliances with other powerful entities, such as the Lich Queen and the Necromancer King, who see in him a potential rival to the Shadow King's former dominance. He also seeks out ancient artifacts and lost knowledge, hoping to further increase his already formidable power. The Empire of Sinheaven, following that incident in relation to the Shadow King, decides to attempt to further research arcane magic in an attempt to gain more answers about the past, and about the Empire of Frosthaven and the Empire of Sanctity. The Demon Lord, seeing this as an opportunity, decides to aid the Empire of Sinheaven in their research, in exchange for information about the other empires, and possibly a more advantageous alliance. He sends one of his most cunning and powerful demons, known as the Grand Inquisitor, to act as an advisor to the Emperor and his court. Meanwhile, the Shadow King continues to consolidate his power, forming an uneasy alliance with the Storm Dragon, who sees the potential for chaos and opportunity in this new balance of power. The two beings strike a deal. The Storm Dragon will aid the Shadow King in his endeavors, in exchange for the freedom to wreak havoc upon the world as it sees fit. Meanwhile, the Empire of Sinheaven attempts to further research arcane magic in an attempt to gain more answers about the past and the Empire of Frosthaven and the Empire of Sanctity. The Shadow King, growing weary of the Storm Dragon's unpredictability, forges a new alliance with the Shadow Queen, who holds the key to unlocking ancient necromantic rituals that could potentially grant immortality to the Shadow King and solidify his reign forever. The Empire of Sinheaven, aided by the Demon Lord's Grand Inquisitor, successfully uncovers ancient knowledge about the Shadow King's true origins, revealing him to be a fallen hero from a long-forgotten age, cursed to walk the earth as a shadow of his former self. They even discover him to have formerly been the necromancer of the Empire of Sanctity who had his powers stripped from him by the Emperor of Frosthaven after the Great Battle of Vatican City. The Empire of Frost reached and decides to attempt to forge an alliance with the Lich King, who has since gone off and began to act on his own from his tomb within the mountains, and thus, the Empire of Frostreach decides to attempt to forge an alliance with the Lich King. A diplomatic mission is sent out, led by a trusted advisor to the throne. After weeks of traveling through treacherous terrain and avoiding the traps and monsters that lurk within the mountain passes, they finally reach the Lich King's tomb. The advisor approaches the tomb, kneeling before its massive, rune-covered doors. He clears his throat and speaks, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Great and mighty Lich King, we come before you as emissaries of the Empire of Frostreach. Our lands are vast and rich, our people strong and resilient. We offer you an alliance, one that would strengthen us both against the encroaching forces of darkness. Your wisdom and power are legendary, and we humbly beg you to consider joining our cause." The advisor pauses, waiting for a response. After a moment, the runes on the tomb's doors begin to glow faintly, casting an eerie light across the chamber. The air grows still and cold, and the silence is broken only by the sound of the Lich King's sepulchral voice. "Your words are intriguing, emissary of the Empire of Frostreach. Your people have built a great civilization in the face of adversity, and your offer of alliance is not without merit. However, I must ask, what is it that you propose? Do you seek merely a mutual defense pact against common enemies? Or do you wish for me to relinquish my autonomy and submit to your rule? The advisor is concerned for a moment, but comes up with a clever way to word it. Well, I wouldn't consider it as you relinquishing your autonomy and submitting to our rule, but we also wouldn't consider it as us relinquishing our autonomy and submitting to your rule. We would rather consider it as us both relinquishing our autonomy and submitting to each other's rule, neither holding the advantage in power. Think of it more as a union between powerful equals to gain an advantage. The advisor pauses, considering his words carefully. The Lich King's tomb remains silent, but the runes continue to glow with an unnatural light. Finally, the Lich King speaks once more. Your proposal is interesting, emissary of the Empire of Frostreach. It is clear that you wish for a true partnership, not a simple alliance of convenience. I must admit, such an arrangement is not without its appeal. However, I must also ask, what role would I play in this partnership? Would I be reduced to little more than a figurehead, or would I be given real power and influence over our combined forces? The advisor ponders for a moment. In truth, you would be just as powerful as our own emperor. Think of it almost as if our two empires were to merge into one, with a dual emperor-managed mega-empire. Also, our empire could provide many bodies for your necromancy, and we could provide each other with knowledge on different forms of magic and magical artifacts. The advisor pauses, waiting for another response. The air in the chamber grows colder still as the Lich King considers the offer. Finally, the tomb's doors creak open, revealing the withered, spectral form of the Lich King himself. He floats down from his throne, his robes billowing in the icy wind that sweeps through the chamber. Very well, emissary of the Empire of Frostreach. I accept your proposal. Our two civilizations shall merge, each retaining its own strengths and traditions. I, the Lich King, shall serve as co-emperor alongside your own monarch, sharing power and influence equally. My army of undead shall march alongside yours, and our knowledge of magic shall be pooled for the betterment of our new empire. The new power, first sensed by the god Emperor Marcus Aurelius in the year 1000, suddenly begins to appear in the state of Alabama, currently controlled by the Shadow King. The Demon Lord, intrigued by the Empire of Sunhaven's discovery, decides to reveal itself to the Emperor, offering an alliance against the Shadow King in exchange for information about the Shadow Queen and her domain. The Emperor, cautious but aware of the Shadow King's growing power, agrees to the alliance. Meanwhile, the new power, first sensed by the god Emperor Marcus Aurelius in the year 1000, suddenly begins to appear in the state of Alabama, which is currently controlled by the Shadow King. The people of Alabama, already exhausted by the eternal struggle against the Shadow King, are at first confused and disoriented by the presence of this new force. Some believe it to be a sign of divine intervention, sent by the gods to liberate them from their dark oppressor. Others, more skeptical, view it as another trick by the Shadow King, a ruse to lure them into a false sense of security. But suddenly, the new power begins to form into a figure, one of darkness, currently hidden by shadows slowly fading to reveal it, a being beyond even the Shadow King, one comparable in power to even the god Emperor Marcus Aurelius himself, who had ascended from this realm over 1,000 years ago. The figure steps forward, its form obscured by the dark tendrils that seem to writhe around it, almost as if it were a living manifestation of the shadows themselves. It speaks, its voice cold and commanding, and its words send shivers down the spines of all who hear it. People of Alabama, it says, I am he whom you have been awaiting. I am he who will lead you to victory against the Shadow King. But know this, I do not come to play the role of a savior. I am not here to liberate you. I am here because it suits my purposes. I am the Dark Emperor, and I claim this realm as my own. The Dark Emperor's words echo through the land, stirring both fear and hope within the hearts of the people. Some bow before him, pledging their allegiance, while others flee in terror. The storm dragon watches from afar, its massive form shifting in the sky, sensing the shift in power and the potential for chaos. The Shadow King, growing ever more desperate to maintain control, begins to make a series of rash decisions. He strikes a deal with the Shadow Queen, offering her unimaginable power in exchange for her aid in defeating the Dark Emperor. The Shadow Queen, ever cunning, agrees, but secretly plans to betray both the Shadow King and the Dark Emperor, using their conflict to further her own nefarious goals. But, before they can even realize it, they are suddenly little more than mere puppets to the Dark Emperor. The Dark Emperor, having already claimed the land, begins to shape it to his liking. He raises dark towers that reach up to the very heavens, their spires dripping with malevolent energy. He creates an army of shadows, twisted beings that bend to his will and unleashes them upon the world. The people of Alabama, once free from the Shadow King's rule, find themselves trapped in an even more insidious web of darkness and despair.